you can go on the internet and actually look on this and see what or how many attacks have been, throughout the last 20, 30 years, approached on nuclear facilities and or DOE facilities. And they're minimal.
Right.
Because, I mean,
they're such hard targets.
Right. You see a hard target. I mean, and it's a nuke facility.
Right.
Who's going to go there? But there have been people who do so. I mean, and again, some are nonviolent. It's not really an imminent threat, but they're just trying to get.
Hey guys, welcome back to Complacency Kills, a Kontek podcast. This is episode 27, Vehicle Barriers. I'm Chase Tobin, and joining me is Matt Scott. Matt, how you doing, buddy? That worked out real well last time, so let's see how that goes. What's up, man?
I'm good. So I guess coming to the studio, and you're telling me we're going to be talking about vehicle barriers.
We're going to talk about vehicle barriers. You have a lot of experience in this realm. Why don't we start with just kind of a quick background of what you do at Kontek and how vehicle barriers apply to the critical infrastructure side of the house?
Yeah, no, that's more than fine. I think diving back a little bit further on how Kontek really approaches the vehicle barrier aspect is kind of a better way. But yeah,
okay, no, wherever you want to start, man.
No, so essentially, Kontek started off really getting the name in the game of critical infrastructure, like you said, but nuke plants.
Okay.
Right. So, and what do we come hurling at nuke plants? Well, after 9/11, they said, hey, we don't really have a plan in place. How do we go ahead and protect our critical infrastructure assets? So you kind of came through, and Kontek started off doing concrete buildings before, but then went ahead and established vehicle barrier systems.
Okay.
The MBB as well as the VK8 that was designed probably about 20 years ago or so, and been headhunting that down this path. Now we start working not necessarily in the nuclear market, but we've been spread letting more so on the DOE side as well, and really kind of spreading for critical infrastructure really. But the VK8 and the MBB, so our vehicle barrier systems, have been a solid seller.
And they crush. So let's talk about threats posed by vehicle attacks. Why do they conduct these attacks? Is there any motive that you can think of? Obviously, I can have an idea, but let's hear your thoughts on why.
The motive is you essentially use the vehicle as a weapon of capability. I mean, you're going to be, carrying out your assault or your attack onto any facility or any individual. I mean, and why not use your vehicle as your number one pinch point for a weapon?
Right.
And hey, how about throw some explosives in there too?
Right. So they can any terrorist activity using vehicle-borne IEDs, whether again that's a truck or a car, or as we obviously unfortunately 9/11 they used planes and things like that. Our job is to try to mitigate those threats as much as possible. Vulnerability of some critical infrastructure sites, or really anywhere, as we've seen here pretty recently, crowded areas can make it a large target. Nuke sites have a lot of people on them. Concerts have lots of people at them. We've got all these sites that are vulnerable. How can we mitigate these threats at these places where there's just a lot of people there? What's our starting point?
I think mitigation is obviously key into doing anything prior to any engagement or activity. Let's say there's a bunch of people. I mean, hell, you remember the game Hungry Hungry Hippos? I mean, if someone's driving a vehicle and they're coming through, yes, it's gonna be like a Hungry Hungry Hippo. But no, to mitigate that threat, I mean, there's obviously a vehicle barrier system on top of whatever your DBT, which is your design basis threat, actually applies to. And hit me on the nose, man, but if I'm going to go to a facility and I'm going to see, a line of concrete barriers around a facility, I'm probably not going to go ahead and, run a vehicle through that.
Makes it a hard target. So with these vehicle barriers, or VK8s or MBBs, can you mount fencing on top of these guys? How does that work more in conjunction with your perimeter security plan?
Well, a lot of people actually think, these concrete blocks are somewhat similar to Jersey barriers. They're not.
Right.
Jersey barriers, they're designed to make an effort to go ahead and guide you in a specific point and or direction. These vehicle barriers are there to prevent 50,000-pound vehicles coming in at 20,000 or 20 miles an hour, or switch that about 20,000-pound vehicles coming at 50 miles an hour to prevent that attack or prevent that insertion in that vehicle.
So they're essentially used as a block line, as a deterrent, but they can also channel and kind of force, if there were to be an attack, into a place that you want the enemy to be. You kind of fix them up, kind of like we used to do a defense in depth in the Marine Corps, right? You set your C-wire and everything up, and you want the enemy to go where you want them to go if they are going to conduct an attack.
Right, and this is what's great about that, right? These blocks are modular.
Okay.
So you go ahead, you put them down, you throw them on your block line, and like you said before, hey, can we put fencing on? That's not just it. You put fencing, cameras, IDS, anything that your DBT actually stands for. I mean, we've seen people put vehicle gates on these blocks. I mean, why not have a continuous just loop around, almost like a reverse moat.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. So that if we're going to keep understanding this vehicle barrier system, kind of how have they evolved in today's security landscape? Obviously, we started out as just like block lines, but you sort of hinted at it a minute ago. We've gone from kind of a crawl, walk, run thing, and anytime we establish any kind of security posture, we always want to improve that as much as we can. So, are these originally were just vehicles, or how did they evolve into like a blast rating? Is that something that was like a catalyst that we discussed, or how I guess talk to me about evolution of perimeter security.
So, I mean, to evolve, you got to kind of go back and really inspect why did this happen the way it did? Mm-hmm. And vulnerability is the key component. So you look at like explosives, right? So your VBITs, they come through. How can we protect better from your basic, like let's say VK8? Like, no, up it up. Prevent that 200-pound TNT explosive. So we went ahead and did that. We utilized some testing, and it's been one of our top block sellers, man, is the MB because it sustains that 200-pound TNT explosive attack, plus it stops the vehicle even after the attack.
So just so I'm clear, and so everybody tuning in, listening to this can hear, not only will the MBB block line stop a vehicle, but also the explosive. You said a 200-pound TNT blast. So a VBIT hitting this block line with a 200-pound TNT blast, that's not little. Explodes, but yet it still maintains a crash rating after the explosion.
That's correct.
That's fantastic.
It is.
That's fantastic.
Now imagine if you have fencing. So we have our anti-climb fencing. Mm-hmm. Then attached. The hardware is very simple to go ahead and put into those blocks. You have that, then you have your IDS and your camera systems on top of that. So I mean, you have the full package right there to go ahead, prevent and protect your facility.
So what started out as just say, no, again, if we're talking about evolution, maybe it's just chain link at some point, but then it evolves into more robust fencing. It moves into block lines. It moves into block lines that are also blast resistant. Now it moves into block lines that are blast resistant with fencing, and now you've got camera intrusion detection systems and FLIR and thermal. You're constantly making your target harder and harder and harder. That's awesome. That's kind of the evolution that I thought it was, but I just want to make sure you clarified that for me, which you did. Thank you very much. Let's get into types of vehicle attacks. We've got deliberately ramming into crowds. We've got coordinated vehicle attacks, layered attacks, potential use of explosives. If you're a bad guy, what are your different strategies to assault, say, a critical infrastructure site?
I mean, penetrate through.
Just get in.
Yeah, just to get in. I mean, there have been, and you can go on the internet and actually look on this and see what or how many attacks have been, throughout the last 20, 30 years, approached on nuclear facilities and or DOE facilities, and they're minimal. Right. Because I mean,
they're such hard targets.
Right. You see a hard target. I mean, it's a nuke facility.
Right.
Who's going to go there? But there have been people who do so. I mean, and again, some are nonviolent. It's not really an imminent threat, but they're just trying to get through. Just something happens.
And they're not always malicious.
Right.
I guess there was one recently where I guess a gentleman just got lost, I think, and ended up at the site, but because they had all these mitigation measures in place, nobody got hurt. They figured out what was going on, and I guess he was I don't know if did he get arrested? What happened to that guy?
He was detained.
He was detained. I don't know if he got arrested. I think it was just more of an oops kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they had all these layers of protection, and with these layers, these vehicle barriers, you always want to expand out as far as you can, but you don't have to have your most comprehensive defense that far out. Maybe that's just your initial deterrent, and then inside you've got your more robust stuff. Is that kind of a trend you see, or is that kind of things to wrap around it?
Let's not get it twisted. I mean, you have like this ample amount applied for security measures for your DBT, design basis threat, and then you have the security aspect of it all. So you have legitimate, trained, professional security officers. They're outperforming any day of the week, and you have the security officer element as well as the deterrence.
Okay.
So I mean, there you go.
You got product and personnel working in conjunction with the right policies and procedures to prevent. That's a lot of P's. These premeditated, pre-planned attacks on your perimeter security.
That's right.
You guys can try to quote that, read the transcript, and figure out how that goes. We're going to start wrapping up here. Let's talk about the different types of vehicle barriers. You already talked about the VK, MBB. Mm-hmm. What others, maybe not necessarily on a nuke site, can you think of that you can utilize for a vehicle barrier system? In your opinion, what other products are out there?
Well, I mean, let's say it's a continuous, let's say, block line, right? Mm-hmm. So you have your entry and exit points. Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to go ahead and integrate, let's say, barrier arms or gates. Okay.
Or a crash beam. That's another jargon out in the world.
Throw that baby on. Now, of course, whenever you have a block line, you need personnel gates.
Right.
So you have and a climb fence, and you go ahead continuous on. You go ahead and put that on top of your blocks. You have your fencing goes into your personnel gates, and then it kind of coordinates and shoots over to your gates or your gate arms.
Sweet. What about anything like maybe bollards or wedge barriers? What are some kind of how do these compare to some of the other systems that you just described? I guess if we were going to get into pros and cons, how do we select where these things go?
Well, I mean, again, if you're looking more of an aesthetic fashion, mm-hmm. bollards are always going to be, the way to go. I mean, you're not going to necessarily put a complete block line around City Hall.
Right. You may have, I've seen them, even these crash-rated planters that you can incorporate into your security plan that, it's concrete and rebar in the shape of a big, beautiful, they have trees and flowers and things like that.
Stop you there. So we have done that.
Yeah.
Right. So the VK8s as well as the MPBs, we can certainly go ahead and provide planners in the center of. And not to mention, they're concrete. So, hire a local artist, tag it up.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Maybe just hide in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's cool that these things are versatile enough and can still be aesthetic. Depends on where you set them up, right? So if we're going to integrate all these barriers together, and whether, again, if it's like you said, say a guardhouse, a block line, gate arms, crash beams, all the IDS and things like that, that creates one comprehensive VCP or ECP checkpoint.
Correct.
That's going to give you a visual deterrent because, man, this thing looks scary. I've got camera deterrents. Man, somebody's going to see me if I try to attack this, so I better make sure I get in, or maybe I shouldn't do this. Or again, if it's in country or something like that, maybe that's a suicide bomber. They don't care, obviously, but they're still going to think twice once they get in there. Okay, is this something I'm really worth dying for, right? So all these things integrated together give you, again, that comprehensive security plan. So that's important to note that there's not just a one size fits all for these things.
Right.
You need to have somebody like yourself come on and some of our team to get in and do a site assessment and figure out where you're strong, where you're weak, what products are out there, how can we make this weakness turn it into a strength.
Right. Well, it's a comprehensive yet customized.
Right.
Very customized to your design basis threat. So, I mean, if you need, double stack blocks.
Right. You're ready to rock and roll.
That's right. Great.
And again, the beauty of working here at Kontek is we have a versatile market. So we can go as custom and robust and in-depth as you need to be for, say, like a critical infrastructure site, but something like a school or a university who doesn't need something that robust, we can scale it down to fit their needs too. Again, if it's just, security officer waving somebody through, they have an arm that at least prevents somebody from, breaching into that perimeter, we can do that as well.
Now, I know you just mentioned not too long ago about guard guard as well, but we do elevated towers. I mean, you obviously know,
Right.
you elevated towers, but you have your block line. You have an elevated tower behind that. I don't, however your designs see fit, and then you have your camera systems on top of the blocks as well as your fencing needs. You are impenetrable at that point.
Let's not get too cocky, but you're right. You feel really good. But that also give that officer manning that VCP or manning that guard booth a higher sense of confidence that if and when something happens, they're protected from it, they can respond to it, and they can neutralize that threat in a quickness. That's why this is important. It's good to have that feeling of invulnerability, but you also need to get complacent to it. So, because as we know, complacency kills, right? So I don't know how we segued into that, but that was good. That was good. So I guess to end up, factors in influencing barrier system selection. If you're going to select a barrier, again, it's off of your design-based threat, depending on how high or low threat your facility is. Talk a little bit about terrain. How does that affect? Can we if there's not a moat, but there's a waterway that comes through, is there a way to mitigate some of that stuff from, say, divers coming in or anything like that?
No, of course. So before getting into that, we always want to go ahead and see, what blocks we can actually lay on that terrain.
Okay.
Whether or not there's underground waterways, underground utilities or whatnot. So it'll definitely differ from, the weight of the actual block line to, the penetration. So you'll have your VK8, which is 10 tons or 10,000 pounds. And then you have your MBBs, which is about 22,000 pounds. So it's a little different.
Right.
So a little bit more tonnage.
Right. You have to be mindful of what's underneath the ground, not necessarily because we're digging, but because of the actual weight. If it sinks and the block line gets off. So that gets into, I guess, the last point I wanted to make is maintenance and longevity. At any site, no matter where you're at, whether it's a critical infrastructure site or a school or a police department or anything like that, people should always be, how can I make this better? How can I maintain a system that I have? Is my system up to date? What do I need to do to get my system up to date? All these things have to be, if you've got a good risk manager or security manager or security director, they need to be asking these questions and get them answered. Because if you have a facility that hasn't been updated in 20 years. 20 years of technology is light years in this day and age. So with facial recognition and FLIRs and all these things, and especially with the vehicle barrier stuff, that's something that people need to pay attention to and get be at the forefront of force protection, as it were, I know it's a good tagline, right? But to keep their personnel and assets safe.
Right.
So any thoughts on that, or do we need to expound upon that further?
You're talking about concrete blocks.
Right.
And it's, if there's some insufferable damage to said concrete block, then just go ahead and replace it.
Right. Easy day.
Right. Easy day. Now, longevity of it wise, you just put a concrete block right into a static position. That's it. Unless, there's severe deterrent, on the block, or it's just deterring away from. No,
you'll be good to go.
Yeah, man.
Awesome.
Real simple.
Awesome. Well, I think that pretty much gets into everything we need to talk about as far as vehicle barriers and how they integrate into a comprehensive security plan. Any final thoughts on vehicle barriers before we close out today?
You would have never thought seeing vehicle barriers could actually prevent things coming in and or preventing them to go out. But now working in this industry, it's a must-have.
Right.
I'm not saying it's a needed necessity, but it's definitely a must-have.
It definitely helps. We just saw a study the other day. I believe every day 100 vehicles go through a storefront somewhere in America. And I heard a stat one time, it's about every 52 seconds. That's about the case, which I'm not real good at math, but I think those kind of jive. Just having something simple like a bollard in front of a convenience store, for example, is a very small scale representation of what we've been talking about in this whole video.
We certainly take everything for granted.
100%.
Yeah.
So, well, awesome, man. Well, that's been an awesome talk on vehicle barriers. Thank you for joining me. As always, we've been here 2 months in a row now, so we might be the faces of this thing, man. We'll see what happens. So,
Smiles.
Hey, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Please check us out on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check us out anywhere else podcasts are found. I'm Chase Tobin. This is Matt Scott. This is Complacency Kills Kontek Podcast. Until next month, see you later.